I'm Carrie Williams, 67 years old, and I've spent my life building a grocery store chain from nothing. Started with one small shop and grew it to 12 successful stores across 3 counties. Despite my success, I've always kept a low profile, especially with my daughter-in-law, who believes I'm just a retired cashier. But everything changed that day in my own store when I heard words that shattered my heart. Before I tell you what happened that awful day, let me know where you're watching from. And hit that subscribe button if family drama stories make you think about your own relationships. My journey began when I was 16, bagging groceries at the local market. I learned every aspect of the business, from stocking shelves to managing inventory. By 35, I had saved enough to buy my first small grocery store. It wasn't much, just a neighborhood market with squeaky floors and outdated refrigeration, but it was mine. I named it Carrie's Market and poured my soul into making it successful. Over the next 20 years, I expanded to 12 locations across the region. Each store maintained that neighborhood feel. I believed in places where cashiers knew customers by name and where quality didn't mean unaffordable prices. My stores became community fixtures, and I took immense pride in what I'd built. During those years of growth, I met and married William. He was an accountant who helped me organize my finances as the business expanded. We had one son, Thomas, who grew up watching me build this business. William passed away 10 years ago from cancer, leaving just Thomas and me. Thomas went to college to study business, which thrilled me. I hoped he would eventually take over the family business. During his senior year, he met Amanda, a marketing major from a wealthy family. Their romance was whirlwind, engaged within 6 months, and married shortly after graduation. Initially, I thought Amanda was lovely, charming, beautiful, and she seemed to make Thomas happy. But after the wedding, I began to notice changes. Amanda had expensive tastes, designer clothes, luxury vacations, and a house they couldn't afford on Thomas's entry-level salary. Increasingly, they came to me for financial help. I wanted to support them, so I gave generously, hoping it was just a phase as they established themselves. When my grandson Jackson was born 8 years ago, I was overjoyed. I immediately fell in love with this small boy who had my late husband's eyes. I thought his birth might help ground Amanda and Thomas, but, if anything, their spending increased to include premium baby gear, a nursery renovation, and eventually private preschool. 5 years ago, I decided to step back from day-to-day operations of the business. I remained the owner, but hired an exceptional management team while keeping an eye on major decisions. I wanted time to enjoy my grandson and the fruits of my labor. Thomas took a position as vice president in the company, a position I created for him, hoping he would learn the business from the inside. But I noticed he took credit for the company's success at social events, rarely mentioning my role in building it. As time passed, Thomas grew increasingly distant. Our once close relationship faded as Amanda's influence over him grew stronger. Still, I tried to maintain our connection, hosting Sunday dinners and attending Jackson's school events when invited. Despite my financial success, I maintained modest habits. I drove a 5-year-old sedan, lived in the same house I'd owned for 30 years, and dressed for comfort rather than style. My management team knew my worth and treated me with deep respect. But at home, I felt increasingly invisible. Our Sunday family dinners had once been filled with laughter and conversation. Thomas would share stories from work. Little Jackson would show me his latest school projects, and I'd cook everyone's favorites. But over time, these gatherings grew tense and less frequent. Amanda would check her watch repeatedly, sighing loudly when I took time to tell a story. Her eyes would roll when I mentioned anything about the old days or how we used to do things. What hurt most was watching Thomas's reaction instead of defending me. He'd often join her with an impatient glance or dismissive comment. Last Thanksgiving, I overheard a conversation that broke my heart. I was carrying dessert from the kitchen when Amanda's voice drifted down the hallway. "I can't wait to leave. Having dinner with that old burden is exhausting." I froze pie in hand as Thomas replied, "Just a little longer, then we can go." Even little Jackson had begun parroting his mother's disrespectful language. When I offered to help him with homework, he said, "Mom says your ways are outdated," breaking my heart all over again. Still, I tried to maintain our relationship. Jackson was my only grandchild, and I treasured every moment with him. Amanda's expensive tastes were evident throughout their home designer furniture. That children couldn't touch a kitchen renovation. That cost more than my first store and a closet full of shoes with red bottoms. That she made sure to mention cost thousands each. She drove a luxury SUV that Thomas couldn't afford on his salary alone, though he pretended otherwise. Thomas held the VP position at my company, a role I'd created specifically for him. I hoped he would learn the business from the ground up, as I had done. But he seemed more interested in the title than the work. In company meetings, he would speak confidently about strategies my management team had developed, presenting them as his own ideas. Several times, my CFO Maria had called to tell me about Thomas, taking credit for the company's success at business functions, never mentioning my role in building it. What hurt most was watching my son transform from the kind, thoughtful boy I raised into someone who seemed embarrassed by my presence. When Amanda's friends visited, Thomas would introduce me vaguely as Carrie, rather than my mother. At Jackson's school events, when they remembered to invite me, I was seated far from the family, almost like an afterthought. Despite these disappointments, I held on to hope. I told myself Thomas was just trying to impress his wife, that eventually he would remember the values I had raised him with. I made excuses for his behavior, remembering how proud I'd been watching him graduate college, how he'd hugged me tightly at his wedding. Somewhere inside that man was still my son, I believed. I just needed to be patient enough for him to find his way back. As months passed, the situation with Thomas and Amanda deteriorated further. During a family dinner in March, Amanda casually mentioned they were considering private school options for Jackson. "It's so expensive," she sighed, looking pointedly at me. "But the connections he'll make are worth it." Thomas nodded along, adding, "Mom, We might need to discuss some financial arrangements soon. The hints about money and inheritance grew more frequent and less subtle. One evening, when Thomas stopped by alone, a rarity, he brought up the business directly. "Mom, Amanda and I were thinking." He began studying my living room as if appraising it. "You're not really involved in the stores anymore. Have you considered signing them over completely? I mean, I'm running things anyway." I was stunned. "Thomas, those stores are my life's work. I'm still the owner, even if I'm not there daily." "But you don't need the stress at your age," he pressed. "Besides, Amanda has amazing marketing ideas that would really modernize the brand." Later that week, I discovered Amanda had posted on social media about their future plans for Carrie's Markets, including a mock-up of a redesigned logo that removed my name entirely. She wrote about taking the family business into the modern era, as if it were already theirs. When I mentioned it to Thomas, he dismissed my concerns, saying, "Amanda's just excited about the potential. Don't be so sensitive." The situation reached a new low during a dinner party at their home. I arrived bearing homemade appetizers, only to be directed by Amanda to use the service entrance at the back of the house. "The caterers are using that door," she explained. "It's just easier if everyone working goes that way." I stood there, trays in hand, as her words sank in. I wasn't being invited as family, I was being asked to serve. Throughout the evening, Amanda introduced her friends to various guests, but conveniently disappeared whenever anyone approached me. Thomas remained by her side, laughing too loudly at her jokes, his eyes occasionally finding me in the kitchen, with a mix of guilt and detachment. When Jackson's school held a Grandparents' Day event, I learned about it from my neighbor, whose grandson attended the same school. When I called Thomas to ask about it, he claimed, "Amanda was supposed to tell you, must have slipped her mind." The hurt of being deliberately excluded was becoming a familiar ache. More concerning were the reports from my store managers. Maria called to inform me that Thomas and Amanda had been visiting stores, telling employees about changes they planned to implement soon. They spoke about staff reductions and replacing my community-focused policies with more profitable approaches. Employees who had been with me for years were growing nervous about their futures. During this time, my best friend Susan became my lifeline. A widow herself, she understood the complex emotions I was facing. "Carrie," she said during one of our coffee dates, "you built that business with your own hands. Don't let anyone, not even your son, make you feel small." I nodded, but admitted, "He's still my son. I keep hoping he'll remember who he is, who I raised him to be." Susan took my hand. "Sometimes love means setting boundaries, even with your children." As if my emotional pain wasn't enough, I experienced a health scare, a minor heart arrhythmia that required an overnight hospital stay. I called Thomas from the emergency room, and he promised to come right away. He never showed. The next day, he sent a text claiming work emergencies and asking if I could take a taxi home. The nurse who discharged me looked more concerned about my leaving alone than my own son had about my hospitalization. That night, alone in my house, I felt the full weight of my isolation. The business I had built provided for Thomas's education, his comfortable life, and his future security. Yet, he couldn't spare an hour to drive his mother home from the hospital. I sat in my kitchen surrounded by photos of a family that no longer existed in the way I remembered, and wondered how we had arrived at this point. The day that changed everything started like any other Tuesday. I still made unscheduled visits to my stores, not to micromanage, but to maintain connections with long-term employees and get a feel for operations. I dressed casually in slacks and a simple blouse. Nothing that screamed owner, which was exactly how I preferred it. I arrived at my flagship store, the largest of my 12 locations, and the most profitable. The manager, Maria, had been with me for 15 years, working her way up from cashier. She spotted me immediately and approached with a warm smile. "Carrie, wonderful to see you," she said, giving me a brief hug. "How's that grandson of yours?" We chatted briefly before I began my usual walkthrough, checking displays and greeting employees. Many called me by name, showing genuine pleasure at seeing me. I was examining a new organic produce section when I heard a familiar voice that made me freeze. "Jackson, put that back. We don't need that brand." It was Amanda. I turned slightly and saw them. Thomas pushing a cart, Amanda examining items with her designer purse dangling from her arm, and 8-year-old Jackson trailing behind, looking bored. They hadn't noticed me yet. Something made me hold back instead of approaching. I kept a discreet distance, watching as they moved through the store. None of them acknowledged the carefully designed displays I had approved, the competitive pricing strategy I had implemented, or the exceptional customer service my employees provided. Amanda complained about nearly everything: the layout, the lighting, even the background music. "When we take over," I heard her mutter to Thomas, "this all changes." They approached the deli counter where Jake, a college student who had worked for me for 3 years, was serving. He spotted me a few yards away and smiled brightly. "Mrs. Williams, good to see you today," he called out. Amanda's head whipped around, trying to locate who he was addressing. When her eyes landed on me, her expression soured. She leaned toward the counter and said in a voice loud enough for nearby customers to hear, "That old woman is the maid, don't talk to her." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood frozen as Thomas snickered and added, "Yeah, she helps around the house sometimes. Doesn't understand much English." Little Jackson, mimicking his parents, chimed in, "She's super old and her food tastes bad." They laughed together, a family united in mockery, while Jake's expression shifted from confusion to discomfort. He looked between me and my family, clearly uncertain how to respond. Maria, who had been approaching with a clipboard, stopped short as she overheard. Her eyes widened in shock, and she opened her mouth, likely to correct them about who I was. I subtly shook my head, and she closed her mouth, understanding my signal but looking troubled. In that moment, I felt a complex wave of emotions: humiliation burning my cheeks, a deep ache in my chest, and an odd sense of clarity cutting through it all. The blood rushed in my ears as I watched my son, his wife, and my grandson laugh at my expense, completely unaware that they stood in a building I owned, surrounded by employees I had hired and trained in a business I had built from nothing. I observed them as if from a great distance, noting how Thomas's shoulders shook with laughter, how Amanda's hand rested possessively on his arm, how Jackson watched his parents for cues on how to behave. This wasn't a momentary lapse or a misunderstanding. This was who they had become, or perhaps who they had always been beneath the surface. My hands trembled slightly as I turned away. No confrontation, no angry words. I simply walked toward the exit, nodding goodbye to Maria, whose eyes reflected sympathy and indignation on my behalf. Outside, the bright sunlight seemed at odds with the darkness I felt within. I sat in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, and allowed myself to feel the full impact of what had just occurred. For years, I had made excuses for their behavior, clinging to memories of better times and hoping for change. But there, in the parking lot of the store I had built with decades of hard work, I finally acknowledged the painful truth. Hope was not a strategy. No amount of patience or generosity on my part would change who they had chosen to be. I drove home in a daze, tears blurring my vision, until I had to pull over twice to compose myself. My house felt emptier than usual as I entered the photographs of Thomas and Jackson on the mantel, now seeming like images of strangers. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to cry openly, deep sobs that came from a place of recognition rather than just hurt. That evening, as I sat with a cup of tea, watching the sunset from my porch, something shifted inside me. The crushing pain began to transform into something else: determination. I had not built a business from nothing by being passive. I had not overcome countless obstacles by accepting mistreatment. Somewhere along the way, in my desire to be a loving mother and grandmother, I had forgotten the strength that had defined most of my life. "Enough," I whispered to the empty room. The sound of my own voice, firm and clear, was startlingly empowering. The next morning, I called my attorney, Harold Fleming, who had handled my business affairs for decades. "I need to see you today," I told him. "It's about my will and the business succession plan." Harold made time immediately, and by noon, I was sitting in his office explaining what I wanted to do. To his credit, he listened without interruption, only raising his eyebrows slightly at certain details. "You're sure about this, Carrie?" he asked when I finished. "It's a significant change." "I've never been more certain of anything," I replied, my voice steady. Over the next 3 hours, we restructured my estate plan. Thomas would no longer inherit the business or the majority of my assets. Instead, I created a profit-sharing plan for employees who had been with the company for more than 5 years. A significant portion would go to a foundation supporting small business education for women. The house and a reasonable trust would remain for Jackson's education, but accessible only when he turned 25. And with trustees, I trusted to oversee it. As for Thomas's position in the company, I decided he needed to earn his place rather than having it handed to him. The CEO position he expected to inherit would instead go to Mariah, whose loyalty and business acumen had consistently impressed me. Walking out of Harold's office, I felt lighter than I had in years. The company's 30th anniversary celebration was scheduled for the following weekend, a perfect opportunity to announce the changes. At home, I called Susan to tell her about my decision. "I'm proud of you," she said. "It's about time you reclaimed your power." I spent the next few days gathering documentation of Thomas and Amanda's behavior emails to staff about changes they had no authority to make, social media posts claiming ownership they didn't have, and testimonials from employees about their treatment. Not for public humiliation, but as reinforcement for myself if my resolve weakened. The day before the anniversary event, I did something I hadn't done in years. I visited an upscale boutique and purchased a tailored suit that fit my figure perfectly. I had my hair styled at an expensive salon and even splurged on professional makeup. The woman who looked back at me from the mirror wasn't just Carrie, the mother or grandmother. She was Carrie Williams, successful business owner and self-made woman. I had forgotten her for too long. That evening, I sat down and wrote exactly what I wanted to say at the event. No anger, no accusations, just truth, clearly and calmly stated. As I wrote, I realized this wasn't just about Thomas and Amanda. It was about valuing myself enough to expect basic respect, something I should have insisted on long ago. The company's 30th anniversary celebration was held at the Grand Plaza Hotel in the city center. I arrived early to speak with the event coordinator and ensure everything was arranged as I had requested. The ballroom looked beautiful, with displays chronicling the growth of Carrie's markets, from one small store to 12 successful locations. I stood by the entrance greeting employees as they arrived. Many did a double take at my appearance, the elegant suit, the professional hairstyle, the quiet confidence in my posture. Maria arrived early and squeezed my hand in support, aware of what I planned to do. Thomas and Amanda arrived fashionably late, as was their habit. Amanda wore an expensive black dress with prominent designer logos on the accessories. Thomas looked handsome in a suit I recognized as new, another expenditure they likely couldn't afford without my support. Their expressions when they spotted me were priceless confusion, followed by non-recognition, then shock as they realized who I was. Amanda recovered first, approaching with an air kiss near my cheek. "Carrie, you look different," she said, eyes scanning my outfit as if searching for the price tag. "Is that new?" Thomas nodded awkwardly. "You look nice, Mom. Didn't expect to see you here so early." "It's my company's anniversary," I replied simply. "Where else would I be?" Before they could respond, I excused myself to speak with other guests. From the corner of my eye, I watched Amanda working the room, introducing herself as the owner's daughter-in-law and hinting at exciting changes coming soon. She had no idea how right she was about changes, though not the ones she anticipated. When dinner concluded, it was time for speeches. Thomas straightened his tie clearly, expecting to be called up as the company VP. Instead, the MC introduced me. The room fell silent as I took the stage. I looked out at the faces of people who had contributed to my company's success, from cashiers to managers, warehouse staff to accountants. Then I found Thomas and Amanda's faces in the crowd, watching with growing unease. 30 years ago, I opened the first Carrie's Market with nothing but determination. And a loan I wasn't sure I could repay, I began. Many of you have been with me for significant portions of that journey, and your loyalty has been the backbone of our success. I went on to highlight key employees announcing the new profit-sharing plan that would reward their dedication. The room erupted in applause while Thomas and Amanda exchanged glances. As I look to the future of this company, I continued when the room quieted, I've made some decisions about its leadership. Effective immediately, Maria Gonzalez will be promoted to Chief Operating Officer with a path to CEO within the next year. Murmurs spread through the audience. Thomas half rose from his chair, his face flushing. Additionally, we'll be restructuring the executive team to better reflect the values this company was built on: community connection, fair treatment of employees, and integrity in all dealings. I never directly stated that Thomas was being removed from leadership consideration, but as I outlined the qualifications for the executive team, the implication was clear. His title would remain for now, but his authority would be significantly reduced. After the speech, I was surrounded by well-wishers and employees expressing gratitude for the profit-sharing announcement. Through the crowd, I could see Thomas and Amanda in heated conversation. Eventually, they approached Amanda's smile tight and artificial. "Could we speak privately?" Thomas asked, his voice strained. We moved to a small meeting room off the main ballroom. As soon as the door closed, Amanda's facade cracked. "What was that?" she demanded. "You humiliated us in front of everyone, after all we've done for the company." "What exactly have you done for my company, Amanda?" I asked quietly. "Thomas is the VP. He's been running things while you've been well enjoying retirement." I turned to my son. "Is that what you think, Thomas? That you've been running the business?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I've contributed significantly, and we had an understanding about the future." "Did we?" "Because I understood I was grooming you to earn leadership, not entitled to it," I replied. "But that's not why we're having this conversation." I took a deep breath. "Last Tuesday, I was at the flagship store. I heard what you said to Jake at the deli counter." Their expressions shifted from confusion to realization. Thomas paled. "Mom, that was just a joke. We didn't. That old woman is the maid. Don't talk to her." I quoted Amanda's words precisely. "And you," Thomas added, "that I help around the house and don't understand English." Jackson said, "I'm super old and my food tastes bad." Amanda's hand flew to her mouth. "Carrie, we had no idea you were there. It was just silly banter." "Which makes it worse," I said, "because it reflects how you truly think of me when you believe I'm not present." Thomas stepped forward. "Mom, please. Whatever you heard, it was taken out of context." "There is no context in which treating another human being that way is acceptable," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "Let alone your mother in the store she built, surrounded by people who respect her." I told them about the changes to my will and business succession plan. With each detail, Amanda's face grew paler. Thomas looked increasingly desperate. "You can't do this," he finally said. "The business is our inheritance. It's Jackson's future." "The business is mine," I corrected him. "Built with my hands, my risks, my sacrifices. I've always been generous with you, Thomas, but I won't leave my life's work to people who don't respect its founder. We respect you, Amanda interjected. This is just a misunderstanding. Is it because I've observed a pattern over years, not just one incident? I've made excuses for both of you, hoping things would change. But that day in the store showed me who you really are. Jackson chose that moment to poke his head into the room, having escaped whoever was watching him. His eyes widened at the tension. What's happening? Is Grandma in trouble? The innocence of his question broke through the tension. I knelt to his level. No, sweetheart, Grandma's not in trouble. We're just having an adult conversation. As Jackson looked between his parents and me, I saw confusion in his eyes, perhaps the first recognition that the dynamics he'd observed weren't normal or kind. Amanda quickly ushered him out, but not before I saw something shift in her expression, the realization that her son had witnessed her in a moment of exposure. When she returned, both she and Thomas adopted more conciliatory tones, but I remained firm. The changes were made. Their behavior had consequences. And while I would always be Thomas's mother, our relationship would need to be rebuilt on new terms, ones that included basic respect. They left the event early, Amanda in tears, and Thomas looking shell-shocked. I remained until the end, surrounded by the community of people who had helped build my business and who treated me with the dignity every human deserves. The weeks following the anniversary event were quiet on the family front. Thomas didn't call, and Amanda unfriended me on social media. I had expected as much and gave them space to process what had happened. Initially, the silence was painful. Despite their behavior, they were still my family, and the rupture left a hole in my life. But as days turned to weeks, I found myself filling that void with other connections. I began mentoring young entrepreneurs through a local business association. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected while trying to maintain my strained relationship with Thomas and Amanda. At work, the atmosphere changed noticeably. Employees seemed more engaged knowing they now had a stake in the company's success. Maria thrived in her new leadership role, bringing fresh ideas while maintaining the core values I had established. Most surprisingly, I discovered aspects of myself that had been dormant for years. I joined a book club, took a painting class, and even went on a weekend trip to the coast with Susan, something I would have hesitated to do before always making myself available in case Thomas called. About a month after the event, I received an unexpected visitor. Jackson appeared at my door one afternoon, having ridden his bike to my house without his parents' knowledge. "Grandma, are you still mad?" he asked as I welcomed him in. We sat at the kitchen table with cookies and milk, just as we had done when he was younger. I explained in simple terms that I wasn't mad, but that sometimes adults need to set boundaries when they aren't treated kindly. Like when kids at school are mean and the teacher says we don't have to play with them, he asked. Something like that. I nodded. But I still love you very much, and you're welcome here any time. His visit opened a door. The following week, Thomas called. His voice was subdued, missing the confidence that had bordered on arrogance in recent years. "Mom, I've been thinking about what happened," he began. "I need to apologize. We met for coffee at a neutral location." For the first time in years, Thomas spoke candidly about his marriage, his financial pressures, and how he had lost sight of values I had taught him. "Amanda doesn't know I'm here," he admitted. "She's still processing." I appreciated his honesty, but made it clear that genuine change, not just words, would be necessary to rebuild trust. The business decisions would stand, but my door remained open to a healthier relationship. Over the following months, Thomas began visiting regularly on his own. Occasionally, he brought Jackson. Amanda remained distant, though she sent a stiff birthday card when the time came. It was a small gesture, but more than I had expected. The healing wasn't instant or complete. Some days, the hurt still surfaced when I remembered their laughter in the store. But more often, I found myself focused on the present, rather than dwelling on past wounds. I realized that my worth had never been dependent on my son and daughter-in-law's perception. My value wasn't diminished by their treatment. In giving so much power to their opinions, I had temporarily forgotten the strength that had carried me through building a business, losing my husband, and countless other challenges. 6 months after the incident, I launched a scholarship program for the children of my employees, naming it after my late husband. At the announcement ceremony, I spotted Thomas in the back of the room. He didn't approach, but his presence felt like a tentative step forward. That evening, reflecting on the journey, I understood that standing up for myself hadn't just changed my family dynamics, it had restored my relationship with myself. The peace that came from that restoration was worth whatever relationship adjustments were still unfolding. Life continues to evolve. My business thrives under new leadership. My relationship with Thomas is a work in progress. Amanda and I maintain a cordial distance, and Jackson visits often now, curious about the business his grandmother built. I don't know what the future holds for us as a family, but I know this dignity is not negotiable, not even with those we love most. Sometimes the greatest act of love, both for others and yourself, is to stand firmly in your truth and let the chips fall where they may. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who didn't treat you with respect? What did you do? And how did it change your relationships? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more life experiences that might help you navigate your own relationships. Remember that your worth is never determined by how others treat you, but by how you treat yourself. Thank you for listening to my story today, and I wish you the courage to honor your own boundaries.